Well, hello, Simon Dowling here, just taking a moment to catch my breath and reconnect with nature. Over the last couple of weeks I have been in a number of meetings, all of which have been very fast paced, and I don't know about you, but I tend to find that quite tiring. When it comes to collaboration, one of the big challenges of getting groups and teams to work well together is just finding that right dynamic where the pace of communication and understanding between folks is just right. And almost invariably that means slowing the pace down a couple of notches. Not so much that it becomes stilted and strained, which I think some folks can be guilty of doing, but just to the point where everyone in the room can meaningfully engage. Of course, through our own eyes, the pace we move at is just perfect. Thank you very much. There's a wonderful line from the late comedian George Carlin. Have you ever noticed that anyone driving slower than you is an idiot, and anyone going faster than you is a maniac? Of course, when the communication moves too fast, a few things happen, and sadly, for many teams, these are par for the course. Perhaps some of them sound familiar. The cheaters in the room, as I call them, as in the animals with spots who run very fast, they're comfortable playing at that pace, and are the ones who do all the talking, joined perhaps by those who drank too much coffee that morning, which every so often might be me. The thinkers, meanwhile, get left behind. By the time they've considered a point, the cheaters and the caffeinators have bolted ahead, and the moment to contribute gets lost. And it takes a pretty confident thinker to jump in and try to rewind the conversation. And the others, well, they just tune out. In all cases, there's a real risk that people feel unheard, even if they've been able to speak up. And that's just the dynamic between people. There's also the problem that good stuff actually does get lost. And with all that pace, nothing ever gets explored properly. Reminds me a little bit of a tour we went on when we were in Vietnam a few years ago. The driver we hired took us on such an ambitious road trip that we didn't have time to stop at any of the amazing destinations that we were sailing past. Ah, look, over there, that's a waterfall, very beautiful, but we cannot stop, we've got to keep moving. And at a certain point, I think we stopped disagreeing with him. We just wanted to get out of there alive. We felt like hostages. So what could you be doing in your own meetings and group interactions to get the pace right? Well, there are a heap of little techniques and strategies you can use, but let me share a few of my favourites. First, as simple as this might seem, do not cram too much into the agenda in the first place. Allow yourself enough time. We seem to be living in an era where people wear their ability to cram stuff in as a badge of honour, to do more. But at what cost? Second, name pace as something to keep an eye on. For example, in the meeting or in the conversation, you might say, how is the pace? Or do we need to slow the conversation down a bit? Give ourselves a bit of breathing space. The third thing is to give people thinking beats, what I like to call page breaks. In other words, after each of the key moments in a meeting, ask everyone to take a minute or two to reflect on the conversation so far. What stood out for you? What haven't we discussed? Maybe invite people to grab a glass of water or sit down and jot down the one thing that stands out most of all from the conversation. Perhaps after that, you could do a quick whip around the table and ask people to share what that one thing is. All of that gives people's cognitive processes a chance to catch up with what's going on in the room. And the final thing I think is really important is to be mindful of the way you are listening and learning, specifically to listen and learn out loud. In other words, don't just listen with your ears, listen with your mouth. Now, this can sound a little contrived talking about it here in isolation, in my backyard, but let me give you some examples of what I mean. So you might be sitting in a meeting, and as people are talking or in a conversation, you say things like, "Oh, really?" Or, "Oh, is that right? I didn't realise that." Or, "That sounds really important." Or, "Is that the new policy that you're referring to?" "Ah, okay, gotcha. Uh-huh." In other words, what you're doing at every beat of the way is showing people that not only do you hear them, but you're kind of cognitively registering stuff as you go. Of course, you can do some of this with non-verbal signals, facial expressions and the like, but if you're chairing a meeting, I think it's really important to ever so slightly exaggerate this out loud aspect of your listening so that you model the way for others and consciously slow things down. So next time you're in a group meeting, take a moment to reflect on the pace, really observe, and if it needs slowing down at all, see whether any of these 4 tips I've just offered might help. Let me know how you go with it, but otherwise I shall see you next time.